The most dangerous moment in a person's life is not failure. It is not heartbreak. It is not poverty. It is not humiliation. The most dangerous moment in a person's life is the moment they begin believing they have no control. Because once a human being surrenders responsibility, they surrender power. And the moment power leaves the soul, life stops becoming a creation and starts becoming a reaction. Look around carefully. Most people are not truly living. They are responding to notifications, responding to opinions, responding to fear, responding to criticism, responding to pressure, responding to trends, responding to moods. Their emotions are controlled by headlines. Their decisions are controlled by the crowd. Their direction is controlled by circumstances. They wake up every day like leaves in a storm, drifting wherever the winds of distraction decide to carry them. And then they wonder why they feel empty. They wonder why years disappear so quickly. They wonder why they are exhausted despite never truly building anything meaningful. Because life rewards creators, not reactors. The great tragedy of modern life is not that people suffer. Humanity has always suffered. The tragedy is that people surrender their ability to choose who they become through suffering. They hand over the steering wheel of their destiny to temporary emotions, toxic environments, shallow pleasures, and endless distractions. They wait for motivation instead of building discipline. They wait for clarity instead of taking action. They wait for confidence instead of developing courage. But history has never belonged to the people who waited. It belonged to people who moved before they felt ready. When Abraham Lincoln lost election after election, he could have surrendered to bitterness. When Thomas Edison failed thousands of times while trying to create the light bulb, he could have allowed frustration to poison his purpose. When Viktor Frankl stood inside the horrors of concentration camps, watching humanity collapse into darkness, he discovered something terrifying and beautiful at the same time. Everything can be taken from a human being except one thing: the freedom to choose their response. That is where power begins. Not outside you, inside you. The world teaches people to obsess over what they cannot control. Politics, markets, algorithms, opinions, luck, other people's approval. But the moment you become obsessed with what you cannot control, you become weak. Your energy leaks into helplessness. Your focus dissolves into anxiety. Your mind becomes a battlefield filled with imaginary enemies. Highly effective people understand something different. They understand that greatness begins with radical responsibility, not blame. Responsibility. Blame looks outward. Responsibility looks inward. Blame says, "Life happened to me." Responsibility says, "Life challenged me, and now I must decide who I become because of it." There's a profound difference between those two mindsets. One creates victims. The other creates leaders. And leadership has nothing to do with titles. Some of the weakest people on earth sit in positions of authority. Some of the strongest people in history died unknown, poor, rejected, and misunderstood. Leadership is not about status. Leadership is about self-governance. It is about mastering your own mind before attempting to influence the world. A man who cannot control his impulses will eventually destroy his opportunities. A woman who cannot control her emotions will eventually sabotage her future. A person who cannot control their attention will lose their destiny to distraction. Because your life always follows your focus. Always. Whatever controls your attention eventually controls your future. And today, attention is under attack. There are entire industries built around keeping people emotionally reactive, keeping them addicted, keeping them outraged, keeping them distracted enough to consume, but never disciplined enough to create. Weak minds are profitable. Distracted people are controllable. Addicted people are easy to manipulate. That is why being proactive today is no longer just a productivity principle. It is an act of rebellion. It means refusing to let the world program your emotional state. It means refusing to surrender your peace to chaos. It means waking up and deciding that your values will guide your behavior, not your moods. That is rare now. Most people are emotionally homeless. They have no internal foundation. One criticism destroys their confidence. One failure ruins their momentum. One rejection changes their identity. One difficult season convinces them to quit. But deeply effective people are anchored internally. Storms still hit them. Pain still touches them. Failure still wounds them. But they are not controlled by temporary conditions, because their identity is rooted in principles deeper than emotion. That is the difference between a thermometer and a thermostat. The thermometer reacts to the environment. The thermostat shapes the environment. Most people spend their entire lives acting like thermometers. If people are negative, they become negative. If life becomes difficult, they collapse emotionally. If circumstances become uncertain, fear consumes them. But proactive people carry an internal climate. They decide who they are before the world tells them who to become. And that decision changes everything. Because when a person finally understands they are responsible for their response, something awakens inside them. Excuses begin to die. Complaining begins to lose its appeal. Waiting begins to feel unbearable. They stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and start asking, "What is this trying to teach me?" That question transforms suffering into fuel. Suddenly pain becomes a teacher instead of a prison. Discipline becomes freedom instead of punishment. Responsibility becomes empowerment instead of pressure. And this is why so many people stay stuck. Because responsibility is heavy in the beginning. It forces you to confront yourself. It forces you to see how many years were wasted blaming others for choices you were afraid to make. It forces you to admit that procrastination is often fear wearing a disguise. It forces you to acknowledge that many people are not actually tired. They are spiritually directionless. A human being can endure enormous pain when they possess meaning. Look at athletes training before sunrise while the world sleeps. Look at single mothers working multiple jobs to create a future for their children. Look at entrepreneurs risking comfort to build something meaningful. Look at Nelson Mandela spending 27 years in prison without allowing hatred to poison his soul. Look at people throughout history who faced impossible circumstances, yet refused to surrender their identity. They all understood something the average person forgets. Your spirit is stronger than your environment when your purpose is clear enough. Purpose creates endurance. Purpose creates resilience. Purpose silences excuses. Without purpose, people become emotionally fragile because they are living reactively instead of intentionally. Every inconvenience feels catastrophic when your life lacks direction. This is why highly effective people begin with vision, not shallow ambition. Vision. There's a difference. Ambition wants applause. Vision wants meaning. Ambition chases status. Vision chases contribution. Ambition asks, "How can I look successful?" Vision asks, "Who must I become to live truthfully?" And the world desperately needs more truthful people. People with integrity. People whose private behavior matches their public image. People who keep promises even when nobody is watching. People who refuse shortcuts because they understand that character is built in darkness long before success appears in daylight. Character is expensive. That is why so few people possess it. It requires sacrifice. It requires restraint. It requires emotional maturity. It requires telling yourself no when comfort begs for yes. Every great life is built through invisible victories nobody applauds. The decision to wake up early. The decision to study when nobody forces you. The decision to stay calm during chaos. The decision to remain honest when lying would be easier. The decision to continue after failure. The decision to protect your focus in a distracted world. Those moments seem small, but destiny is hidden inside small decisions repeated consistently. A river carves through stone not because of power, but because of persistence. And the human soul works the same way. What you repeatedly do eventually shapes who you become. Habits are not small routines. Habits are architects. Every habit is building a future version of you. Every repeated thought is becoming a belief. Every repeated belief is becoming behavior. Every repeated behavior is becoming identity, and identity shapes destiny. This is why reactive people stay trapped. They try to change outcomes without changing identity. They want confidence without discipline, wealth without self-control, respect without integrity, success without sacrifice. But nature does not reward hypocrisy. A seed must become internally before it becomes externally. The oak tree exists inside the acorn long before it rises from the earth. Likewise, greatness exists internally before the world ever sees evidence of it. That is why proactive living begins in solitude, not performance. Solitude, because you cannot hear your true values in a noisy world. You cannot develop clarity while drowning in distraction. You cannot build a meaningful life while constantly consuming meaningless stimulation. Silence reveals priorities. Silence exposes addictions. Silence confronts the soul. And many people avoid silence because silence forces honesty. It reveals how much of their life is performative, how much energy is spent trying to impress people who are equally lost, how much time is wasted chasing approval from strangers while neglecting their own growth. But transformation begins when a person becomes willing to sit alone with themselves and ask difficult questions. What kind of human being am I becoming? What habits are shaping my future? What distractions are draining my potential? What fears are controlling my decisions? Am I living intentionally or merely reacting to life? Those questions separate conscious living from unconscious existence, because unconscious people drift. Conscious people decide, and drifting is dangerous. Drift long enough and years disappear. Drift long enough and comfort becomes a cage. Drift long enough and mediocrity starts feeling normal. Human beings adapt quickly, even to unhappiness. That is why some people stay in toxic environments for decades. That is why dreams quietly die inside routine. That is why entire lives become monuments to unrealized potential. Not because people lack talent, because they lacked intentionality. The greatest prison in life is not external limitation. It is internal passivity. The belief that tomorrow will somehow magically become different while you continue repeating the same patterns. But change demands interruption. A different future requires different habits. A different identity requires different standards. You cannot keep feeding your mind chaos and expect peace. You cannot keep feeding your body laziness and expect strength. You cannot keep feeding your soul distraction and expect purpose. Every input shapes your internal world, and your internal world eventually becomes your external reality. This is why proactive people guard their minds carefully. They understand that the mind is not a trash can for society's noise. It is sacred territory. Whatever enters repeatedly begins shaping perception. Perception shapes decisions. Decisions shape destiny. Weak thinking creates weak living. Powerful thinking creates disciplined action. That is why history repeatedly shows ordinary people accomplishing extraordinary things once they change their internal narrative. Roger Bannister shattered the 4-minute mile after the world believed it was impossible. Once the mental barrier broke, others quickly followed. The limitation was never physical alone. It was psychological. Human beings often live inside invisible prisons built from inherited beliefs, fear, conditioning, and self-doubt. I'm not smart enough. I'm too old. I'm too late. I don't have the connections. I've failed too many times. But every great leader in history faced uncertainty. Every visionary walked through seasons where nobody believed in them. Every meaningful achievement began as an unpopular possibility. The difference is that proactive people refuse to let external disbelief become internal surrender. They understand that life responds differently to committed people, not interested people. Committed people. Interest talks. Commitment acts. Interest waits for convenience. Commitment moves through discomfort. Interest disappears when emotions fade. Commitment remains loyal to the mission. And this is where self-mastery begins, the ability to act according to principles instead of moods. Because moods are unstable. Principles endure. Feelings change with weather, hormones, circumstances, and opinions. But principles remain solid through chaos. Integrity still matters during hardship. Discipline still matters during exhaustion. Truth still matters during pressure. Responsibility still matters during failure. The strongest people on earth are not those who dominate others. They are those who can govern themselves. A king who conquers nations but cannot control greed is weak. A celebrity adored by millions but addicted to validation is weak. A wealthy man ruled by impulse is weak. Real power is internal. Real freedom is internal. Real victory is internal. And once a person understands this, external success stops becoming the ultimate goal. Success becomes an extension of inner alignment instead of compensation for inner emptiness. Because no amount of money can heal a fractured identity. No amount of fame can replace self-respect. No amount of achievement can silence a soul that knows it abandoned its values. This is why so many outwardly successful people remain inwardly miserable. They mastered performance, but neglected character. They built empires while losing themselves. They conquered industries while becoming strangers to their own conscience. But effective living demands wholeness, alignment, integrity between vision, behavior, values, and action. And that integrity creates something modern society desperately lacks. Trust. Trust in yourself. Trust that you will follow through. Trust that you will remain disciplined even when motivation disappears. Trust that your word means something. Trust that adversity will not break your identity. Trust that your life is guided by principles, not emotional chaos. That kind of trust changes how you walk through the world. It creates calmness during uncertainty. It creates strength during hardship. It creates focus during distraction. Because proactive people stop depending on external conditions for internal stability. They create stability from within. And eventually the world notices. Not because they seek attention, but because disciplined people radiate presence differently. There is something powerful about a human being who knows who they are. Someone who does not panic under pressure. Someone who refuses gossip, excuses, and victimhood. Someone who stays grounded while others become reactive. Someone who carries purpose into every room they enter. That energy influences people more deeply than charisma ever could. Because charisma may impress temporarily, character transforms permanently. And in the end, that is the real legacy of highly effective people. Not productivity, not wealth, not applause. Influence born from integrity. A life that becomes proof that discipline, responsibility, vision, and principles still matter in a distracted world. A life that reminds others they are not powerless, that they still possess choice, that they can still rebuild, that they can still become stronger than their circumstances, that they can still reclaim their attention, their habits, their values, and their future. Because no matter how reactive your past has been, your next decision still belongs to you. And that is where transformation begins. Not tomorrow, not someday. Now. Now is where the battle truly begins, because the moment a human being decides to stop living reactively, resistance appears immediately. Not just external resistance, internal resistance, the kind that whispers when the alarm clock rings before sunrise, the kind that convinces you comfort is safer than growth, the kind that tells you discipline can wait until tomorrow, the kind that says one distraction will not matter, one excuse will not hurt, one compromise is harmless. But life is rarely destroyed in one dramatic moment. It is usually destroyed quietly, piece by piece, habit by habit, decision by decision. A ship does not sink because of the water around it. It sinks because of the water allowed inside. And many people spend years blaming the storms while ignoring the holes in their own discipline. They complain about results while protecting the behaviors that created those results. They want transformation while remaining loyal to the habits keeping them trapped. That is the contradiction, destroying modern lives. People want the rewards of greatness without accepting the responsibility greatness requires. But every meaningful life demands sacrifice. Always. The athlete sacrifices comfort. The leader sacrifices ego. The visionary sacrifices approval. The builder sacrifices distraction. And the person who truly wants freedom must sacrifice immediate pleasure for long-term purpose. This is why self-mastery is rare, because it asks something from you every single day. It demands consistency when emotions fluctuate. It demands focus when the world offers endless distraction. It demands integrity when shortcuts appear tempting. It demands patience in an age addicted to instant gratification. Modern culture trains people to chase speed, but nature respects process. A tree does not become mighty overnight. Steel is not forged without fire. Diamonds are not formed without pressure. And human character does not emerge fully developed through comfort. It is shaped through repeated confrontation with difficulty. That is why hardship often introduces people to themselves. Pressure exposes character. Anyone can appear disciplined when life is easy. Anyone can speak positively during comfort. Anyone can talk about values when nothing valuable is at risk. But adversity reveals the truth. It strips away performance. It removes masks. It shows whether your principles are real or merely convenient slogans. And this is why proactive people do not waste suffering. They study it. They learn from it. They extract wisdom from pain instead of identity from pain. There's a dangerous difference between experiencing failure and becoming failure, between facing darkness and becoming consumed by darkness, between being wounded and allowing the wound to define your future. Many people unknowingly build their identity around their pain. They introduce themselves through limitation, through betrayal, through mistakes, through trauma, through disappointment. Their suffering becomes their story, and their story becomes their prison. But proactive living means reclaiming authorship. It means refusing to let your worst moment become your permanent identity, because the human spirit was not designed merely to survive difficulty. It was designed to transform through it. Look carefully at history. The people who changed civilizations were rarely born into ease. Many emerged from hardship that could have broken them completely. Abraham Lincoln endured oppression and repeated defeat. Helen Keller lived in darkness and silence, yet became a voice for millions. Nelson Mandela lost decades of freedom, but refused to lose his principles. Viktor Frankl witnessed horrors most minds cannot comprehend, yet still discovered meaning within suffering. These people were not superhuman. They were deeply intentional. They understood that while circumstances influence us, they do not have absolute authority over us. And that realization is liberating, because once you truly understand that your response is your responsibility, excuses begin collapsing. The energy once wasted on blame becomes available for growth. The emotional exhaustion created by resentment begins disappearing. You stop waiting for ideal conditions and start building strength within imperfect ones. That is where momentum begins. Not when life becomes easier, when you become stronger. And strength is built through promises kept to yourself. This is why small disciplines matter so much. Making your bed when nobody sees. Waking up when you said you would. Finishing what you started. Training your body even when tired. Reading instead of endlessly scrolling. Staying calm during conflict. Listening without interrupting. Managing your time intentionally. Small disciplines create self-respect. And self-respect changes how a person moves through life. Because when you repeatedly betray your own standards, your confidence weakens. Deep down, you stop trusting yourself. You become emotionally divided. One part of you dreams about greatness, while another part remembers every abandoned commitment. But when you consistently honor your word, especially in private, something powerful develops internally. Your mind becomes quieter. Your focus sharpens. Your posture changes. You stop seeking constant validation because your confidence is no longer dependent on external applause. It is rooted in evidence. Evidence that you can rely on yourself. That kind of confidence cannot be purchased. It must be earned. And earning it requires learning one of the hardest truths about effectiveness. Your life is shaped more by your routines than your intentions. Everyone has intentions. Few have systems. Everyone wants success. Few structure their environment for success. Everyone talks about priorities. Few schedule their lives according to those priorities. This is why so many intelligent people remain stuck. Intelligence alone changes nothing. Information alone changes nothing. Inspiration alone changes nothing. Execution changes lives. Consistency changes lives. Repeated disciplined action changes lives. The world is full of people who know exactly what they should do, but remain trapped because knowledge without action becomes intellectual entertainment. Real growth begins when truth becomes behavior, and behavior is heavily influenced by environment. That is why proactive people become intentional about what surrounds them. They understand that environments silently shape identity. Negative environments normalize negativity. Distracted environments weaken focus. Cynical environments poison ambition. Weak environments reward mediocrity. Eventually, people begin adapting downward without realizing it, because human beings absorb the standards around them. If everyone around you complains, excuses begin sounding reasonable. If everyone around you wastes time, discipline begins feeling extreme. If everyone around you avoids responsibility, accountability begins feeling uncomfortable. That is why protecting your environment is not arrogance. It is wisdom. Because eventually, your environment becomes either a bridge toward your potential or a cage around it. And many people spend years trying to improve their lives while remaining loyal to environments that continuously weaken them. They stay connected to negativity that drains their spirit. They entertain distractions that sabotage their focus. They allow voices filled with fear, cynicism, gossip, and limitation to occupy sacred space inside their minds. Then they wonder why clarity feels impossible. But clarity cannot survive chaos. You cannot build a meaningful future while constantly consuming meaningless noise. You cannot hear your conscience while drowning in endless stimulation. The modern world profits from fractured attention because distracted people rarely become dangerous enough to transform their lives. A distracted mind is easier to manipulate than the disciplined one. That is why attention has become one of the most valuable currencies on earth. Whatever captures your attention eventually shapes your reality. If your attention is consumed by outrage, your mind becomes restless. If your attention is consumed by comparison, your spirit becomes insecure. If your attention is consumed by shallow entertainment, your discipline weakens. But if your attention is directed toward purpose, growth, learning, and meaningful action, your identity begins evolving in that direction. Attention is not merely focus. Attention is life itself, because your life is ultimately the sum of what you repeatedly give your mind to. That is why highly effective people treat attention with extraordinary care. They understand that every day is a battle between what matters and what distracts, between purpose and impulse, between intentionality and drift. And drift is seductive. Drift feels harmless at first. Sleeping a little longer, delaying difficult conversations, postponing important goals, choosing comfort over growth, consuming instead of creating, waiting instead of acting. But drift compounds. Days become years. Potential becomes regret. And one morning, people wake up shocked by a life they slowly created through unconscious repetition. That is why proactive people learn to think long-term. They refuse to live only for immediate emotion because they understand something most people ignore. Every decision is shaping a future self. Every choice either strengthens or weakens the person you are becoming. Every habit is casting votes for your future identity. This is why integrity matters so deeply. Integrity is not about perfection. It is about alignment. It is the decision to make your actions reflect your values, even when nobody is watching. It is refusing to divide yourself into fragments, one version for public appearance and another for private behavior. Fragmented people eventually collapse internally because maintaining false identities drains the soul. But integrated people possess quiet strength. They do not waste energy pretending. They are not constantly performing. They are rooted, grounded, whole. And there is something incredibly powerful about wholeness in a fractured world, because most people today are internally divided. They say health matters while neglecting their body. They say family matters while giving their best energy to distractions. They say purpose matters while wasting years avoiding discomfort. They say integrity matters while compromising values for temporary convenience. This internal contradiction creates suffering, not because people are evil, because they are disconnected from themselves. The human soul was never designed to thrive in contradiction. Deep inside, every person knows when they are abandoning their own standards. That quiet discomfort many people feel late at night is often not confusion. It is misalignment. The soul recognizes when potential is being neglected. That is why proactive living requires courage. Not loud courage, quiet courage. The courage to confront yourself honestly. The courage to admit what must change. The courage to stop blaming your past for the responsibilities of your present. Because while your past may explain you, it does not have to imprison you. This is one of the greatest truths about human beings. We possess the ability to choose a new direction. No matter how many years were wasted, no matter how many failures occurred, no matter how many wrong turns were taken, the future can still change through disciplined decisions repeated consistently over time. A single decision can alter an entire destiny. One decision to become disciplined. One decision to protect your focus. One decision to stop tolerating mediocrity. One decision to reclaim responsibility. One decision to tell the truth. One decision to begin again. History repeatedly proves this. Entire civilizations changed because individuals chose courage over comfort. Rosa Parks refused surrender. Mahatma Gandhi refused violence. Martin Luther King Jr. refused hatred. They understood that true influence begins internally before it manifests externally. Because leadership is not domination. Leadership is moral force. It is the ability to remain anchored to principles when pressure demands compromise. And pressure will always come. There will always be voices encouraging easier paths. There will always be opportunities to abandon your standards for temporary rewards. There will always be moments when exhaustion whispers that discipline is pointless. That is why proactive people build their lives on principles instead of emotions. Emotions fluctuate. Principles endure. Feelings may tell you to quit. Principles remind you why you started. Feelings may seek comfort. Principles seek growth. Feelings may crave applause. Principles seek truth. And truth often demands sacrifice before it delivers reward. That is why the path toward effectiveness is not glamorous in the beginning. It is often lonely, quiet, unnoticed, repetitive. There are no cheering crowds when you wake before dawn to work on your craft. No applause when you choose integrity over convenience. No trophies when you remain disciplined during difficult seasons. But invisible victories create visible transformation. Every moment you resist distraction, you strengthen focus. Every moment you control your emotions, you strengthen character. Every moment you choose responsibility over excuses, you strengthen leadership. And eventually these invisible victories accumulate until your entire presence changes. People begin sensing something different about you. Not arrogance, not performance, depth, stability, clarity. Because disciplined people carry a certain calmness. They are no longer controlled by every external event. Their identity is no longer built on unstable foundations like popularity, comfort, or instant gratification. They have trained themselves to think beyond temporary emotion. And that ability changes everything. Because the moment you stop being ruled by temporary emotion, you begin accessing a deeper level of human potential. Most people never reach that level because they spend their lives trapped in reaction. They react to criticism without reflection. They react to pressure without composure. They react to fear without courage. Their emotional state changes with every circumstance, which means their direction changes constantly too. And a person without internal direction eventually becomes vulnerable to every external influence. That is why self-leadership matters more than talent. Talent without discipline creates inconsistency. Talent without integrity creates destruction. Talent without purpose creates emptiness. History is filled with gifted people who ruined their lives because they mastered skills, but never mastered themselves. Athletes destroyed by ego. Leaders consumed by greed. Artists trapped by addiction. Visionaries sabotaged by arrogance. External success amplified internal weakness instead of healing it. Because success does not build character. It reveals it. If a person lacks internal stability before achievement, success often magnifies the chaos already living inside them. Money exposes values. Power exposes motives. Pressure exposes identity. This is why Stephen Covey's philosophy remains timeless in a world obsessed with shortcuts. He understood something modern culture forgets constantly. Private victories must come before public victories. The world wants public success immediately. Visibility, influence, recognition, wealth. But sustainable greatness is always built privately first, in silence, in discipline, in habits nobody sees. Long before the applause arrives, a skyscraper can only rise as high as its foundation is deep. And human beings are no different. Weak foundations eventually collapse under pressure. That is why proactive people invest heavily in what others ignore. Their mindset, their routines, their emotional control, their spiritual alignment, their ability to focus deeply in a distracted age, their ability to stay truthful when deception would be easier. Because effectiveness is not an event, it is a way of being. It is the gradual construction of a human being capable of carrying responsibility without breaking internally. And responsibility is unavoidable. Every human being will eventually carry weight. Family weight, financial weight, emotional weight, leadership weight. The question is not whether life will become heavy. The question is whether you are becoming strong enough to carry what your future requires. Most people want larger opportunities while avoiding the disciplines that prepare them for those opportunities. But life rarely gives lasting responsibility to unprepared people. Nature itself teaches this principle. Before a tree can hold greater branches, its roots must deepen. Before muscles grow stronger, resistance must be endured. Before gold becomes purified, fire must intensify. Growth always demands pressure. That is why discomfort is not your enemy. Unconscious living is your enemy. Discomfort often signals expansion. The difficult conversation, the early morning discipline, the decision to confront fear, the courage to say no to distraction, the willingness to remain committed when motivation disappears. These moments feel uncomfortable because they require transformation, and transformation threatens the old identity. Your old habits will fight for survival. Your old mindset will resist change. Your old comfort zones will attempt to pull you backward. Because there's a version of you addicted to ease. A version addicted to procrastination. A version addicted to external validation. A version addicted to excuses. And every disciplined action weakens that version while strengthening the future self you are trying to become. This is why personal growth often feels like internal war. One side seeks comfort. The other seeks purpose. One side wants immediate pleasure. The other wants long-term meaning. One side fears failure. The other understands that avoiding growth is the greatest failure of all. And eventually, a decision must be made. Will you spend your life protecting your current identity or building your future one? Because you cannot evolve while clinging to habits designed for survival instead of greatness. Many people are physically alive, but psychologically asleep. They move through routines unconsciously. Wake up, scroll, work, consume, distract themselves, sleep, repeat. Their spirit slowly weakens under the weight of repetition without meaning. But the human soul craves purpose, not entertainment. Purpose. That is why people can possess comfort, yet still feel empty. Because comfort alone cannot satisfy the deeper hunger for significance. Human beings were designed to contribute, to create, to grow, to love, to lead. to serve something larger than themselves. And when that deeper purpose is ignored, people attempt to numb the emptiness with distraction, endless entertainment, endless consumption, endless comparison, endless noise. But noise never heals emptiness. Only meaning does. This is why proactive people become intentional not only about what they do, but why they do it. They understand that purpose transforms ordinary effort into extraordinary endurance. A person connected to purpose can survive seasons that would destroy someone driven only by comfort. Purpose gives suffering direction. Purpose gives discipline meaning. Purpose turns sacrifice into investment. And the absence of purpose creates emotional fragility. Small obstacles feel enormous when there is no greater mission attached to your life. But when vision becomes clear, resilience grows stronger. Suddenly inconvenience loses its power. Temporary pain becomes tolerable because it serves something meaningful. This is how effective people think differently. They stop asking, "How can I avoid discomfort?" and begin asking, "What kind of person must I become to fulfill my purpose?" That question changes everything, because it shifts focus from outcomes to identity. Most people obsess over external goals while neglecting internal development. But identity always sustains what motivation cannot. A disciplined identity continues when excitement fades. A responsible identity follows through when emotions fluctuate. A purposeful identity remains focused during adversity. That is why habits matter more than hype. A motivated person may act once. A disciplined person acts repeatedly. And repeated action is what shapes destiny. Rome was not built in a day. Cathedrals took decades. Great books were written sentence by sentence. Empires rose decision by decision. And meaningful lives are built the same way, through consistent actions aligned with enduring principles. Not dramatic moments, daily choices, quiet choices, invisible choices. The choice to remain calm during pressure. The choice to study instead of waste time. The choice to listen deeply. The choice to protect your word. The choice to continue despite slow progress. These moments appear ordinary, but extraordinary lives are hidden inside ordinary disciplines practiced consistently over time. That is the secret most people overlook, because modern culture glorifies intensity while ignoring consistency. People become addicted to dramatic beginnings. New Year motivation, sudden inspiration, emotional speeches, temporary excitement. But intensity without consistency is like lightning without direction, powerful for a moment then gone. The truly effective person understands that greatness is usually quiet. It looks like showing up when nobody feels like showing up. It looks like practicing fundamentals long after applause disappears. It looks like remaining faithful to principles during seasons where no visible reward exists. And this is where most people quit. Not because they are incapable, because they become discouraged by invisibility. Human beings naturally crave evidence that their effort matters. But some of the most important transformations happen underground long before visible results appear. A seed buried beneath the soil appears lifeless before it breaks through the earth. Yet unseen growth is already taking place. Roots are developing. Strength is forming. Foundation is expanding. The human spirit grows the same way. There are seasons where your progress feels invisible. The discipline feels repetitive. The sacrifice feels unnoticed. The improvement feels slow. But invisible growth is still growth. And people who understand this become unstoppable because they stop depending on immediate reward for continued effort. That is maturity, the ability to remain committed without constant validation. Children need applause for every action. Mature people develop internal standards. And internal standards are powerful because they create independence from external opinion. Once your values become stronger than the crowd's approval, you stop living performatively. You stop chasing temporary admiration. You stop shaping your identity around trends, popularity, or comparison. Comparison is one of the great thieves of modern life. People compare their beginning to another person's peak, their behind-the-scenes struggle to another person's highlight reel. their chapter 1 to someone else's chapter 20. And this destroys gratitude. It destroys focus. It destroys peace. Because comparison shifts attention away from your mission and onto someone else's path. But effective people understand that purpose is personal. A tree does not compete with the river. The river does not compete with the mountain. Each fulfills its nature by remaining true to its design. Human beings lose themselves when they abandon their own path, trying to imitate others. That is why self-awareness matters so deeply. You must know your values. Know your priorities. Know what truly matters to you beneath society's noise. Otherwise, the world will hand you artificial goals and convince you they're your own. And many people spend decades climbing ladders only to realize the ladder was leaning against the wrong wall. They sacrificed health for wealth they do not enjoy. They sacrificed family for status that feels empty. They sacrificed integrity for success that poisoned their peace. Because success without alignment creates internal conflict. You can fool the world temporarily, but you cannot fool your conscience forever. The soul always knows when you are betraying yourself. That is why highly effective living requires more than productivity. It requires wisdom. The wisdom to distinguish between what is urgent and what is important. The wisdom to recognize that not every opportunity deserves your attention. The wisdom to understand that busyness is not the same as purpose. Many people are exhausted not because they are building something meaningful, but because they are scattering their energy across too many meaningless things. Focus is power, and focus requires elimination. Every meaningful yes requires disciplined no's. No to distraction. No to toxic environments. No to endless consumption. No to relationships that drain your spirit. No to habits that weaken your future. No to the comfort of remaining average. Because every distraction carries a hidden cost. Time, energy, attention, potential. And once wasted, those things cannot fully be recovered. This is why proactive people become guardians of their time. They understand that time is not merely money. Time is life. Every hour given to distraction is an hour removed from your purpose. Every moment wasted unconsciously becomes part of a future regret. One day, everyone reaches a moment where they look backward and realize life moved faster than expected. The child became an adult. The parents grew older. Opportunities passed. Seasons disappeared. And suddenly people understand that existence is fragile. That realization can neither create fear or awakening. For effective people, it creates urgency. Not panic. Urgency. The understanding that life is too valuable to spend unconsciously. Too precious to waste reacting endlessly. Too sacred to surrender your future to laziness, distraction, or fear. This is why intentional people live differently. They do not merely drift through days. They design them. They recognize that daily structure eventually becomes destiny. Morning routines matter because beginnings influence direction. Reflection matters because awareness prevents drift. Planning matters because vision without execution remains fantasy. But planning alone is not enough. Courage must follow clarity. Many people know exactly what needs to change in their lives, yet remain frozen because fear controls them. Fear of failure, fear of rejection, fear of judgment, fear of uncertainty. But fear loses power when purpose becomes greater than comfort. Look throughout history, and you will notice something extraordinary. Every person who transformed the world eventually had to act despite uncertainty. Rosa Parks did not know what history would become from one decision. The Wright brothers were mocked before flight changed civilization. Walt Disney faced repeated rejection before creating an empire of imagination. Every visionary walks through doubt before the world calls them successful. Courage does not mean absence of fear. It means movement despite fear. And proactive people understand this deeply. They do not wait to feel fearless before acting. They act according to principles, while fear slowly loses control over them, because action reshapes identity. Every courageous decision teaches the mind that growth is possible. Every disciplined act weakens excuses. Every completed challenge builds resilience, and resilience is one of the greatest forms of wealth a human being can possess, because life will test everyone eventually. Loss will come, failure will come, disappointment will come, pressure will come, and when those moments arrive, your habits will matter more than your intentions. Your principles will matter more than your emotions. Your character will matter more than your image. The storms of life reveal whether your foundation is real. And that is why the greatest investment you will ever make is not in status, possessions, or appearance. It is in the construction of your inner life. Because everything external can change in an instant. Economies collapse. Fame fades. Trends disappear. Strength weakens with time. But character, real character, becomes stronger through adversity when it is rooted in principles that do not move. The world desperately needs people like that now. People who remain calm while others panic. People who remain disciplined while others drift. People who remain truthful while deception becomes normalized. People who remain focused while distraction becomes culture. Because every generation eventually faces a decision between convenience and character, and civilizations rise or collapse based on which one they choose repeatedly. You can already see the consequences of reactive living everywhere. People are overstimulated, yet underdeveloped, constantly connected, yet spiritually disconnected, entertained endlessly, yet deeply unfulfilled. They consume motivation but avoid transformation. They admire discipline from a distance, while remaining loyal to comfort. But comfort has never created greatness. Comfort never built cathedrals. Comfort never crossed oceans. Comfort never changed history. The greatest human achievements emerged because someone became willing to endure temporary discomfort for permanent meaning. That is the price of significance. And every person must eventually decide whether they are willing to pay it. Because the truth is, your future is being shaped right now by what you repeatedly tolerate. The excuses you tolerate, the distractions you tolerate, the weakness you tolerate, the dishonesty you tolerate, the procrastination you tolerate. Your standards create your reality, not your wishes, not your intentions, your standards. If you tolerate inconsistency, inconsistency becomes your identity. If you tolerate mediocrity, mediocrity becomes your future. If you tolerate wasting your attention, your potential slowly erodes beneath distraction. But the moment your standards rise, your life begins changing. Because elevated standards alter decisions, and altered decisions alter destiny. Suddenly, you stop asking whether discipline feels convenient. You ask whether your actions align with your values. You stop asking whether growth feels comfortable. You ask whether remaining stagnant is costing your soul. You stop asking whether purpose is easy. You ask whether living without purpose is unbearable. That shift changes everything because your life moves in the direction of your deepest commitments. Not shallow wishes spoken emotionally for a moment, but true commitments proven through behavior. And behavior reveals belief. If someone says health matters, but continuously destroys their body, behavior reveals the truth. If someone says family matters, but gives all their energy to distraction, behavior reveals the truth. If someone says purpose matters, but never protects time for growth, behavior reveals the truth. Your actions expose your priorities more honestly than your words ever will. That realization is painful for many people, but it is also liberating. Because once you stop lying to yourself, transformation finally becomes possible. Truth is uncomfortable before it becomes freeing. And proactive people choose truth, even when it wounds their ego, because they understand something powerful. You cannot improve a life you refuse to confront honestly. This is why reflection matters so deeply. Quiet reflection, honest reflection, the willingness to examine your habits, motives, relationships, routines, fears, and choices without hiding behind excuses. Most people avoid this because self-confrontation is difficult. It forces accountability. It removes the comfort of blame. It exposes wasted potential. But it also awakens possibility. Because once a human being becomes fully honest, they regain power. They stop pretending. stop performing, stop drifting unconsciously. They begin rebuilding intentionally. And rebuilding always begins internally first, before the external results, before the visible success, before the applause. The internal shift happens when a person finally decides, my life will no longer be controlled by impulse, distraction, fear, or circumstance. I will govern myself. I will choose my values consciously. I will act intentionally. I will build discipline strong enough to carry my purpose. That decision is sacred, because from that moment forward, life stops happening to you and begins responding to you differently. You walk differently, think differently, use time differently, protect energy differently, handle adversity differently. Even pain changes meaning because suffering is no longer viewed as punishment, but as preparation. The disciplined soul understands that resistance develops strength, that pressure develops resilience, that responsibility develops leadership, that sacrifice develops depth, and depth is becoming rare. Modern culture rewards speed over wisdom, visibility over substance, image over integrity, noise over reflection. But deeply effective people refuse to become shallow products of their environment. They choose depth deliberately. They read deeply, think deeply, reflect deeply, work deeply, love deeply, serve deeply, because they understand that a meaningful life is not built on superficiality. It is built on principle. And principles matter because they anchor human beings through uncertainty. When trends shift, principles remain. When emotions fluctuate, principles remain. When chaos erupts, principles remain. This is why the most effective people throughout history were not necessarily the loudest people. Often they carried quiet conviction, internal steadiness, a grounded sense of purpose stronger than temporary conditions. Think of Abraham Lincoln holding a fractured nation together during Civil War. Think of Viktor Frankl finding meaning inside unimaginable suffering. Think of Nelson Mandela leaving prison without surrendering to hatred. Think of people throughout history who endured darkness without allowing darkness to redefine their character. That is true strength, not domination over others, mastery over self. And that mastery is available to anyone willing to live intentionally, not perfectly, intentionally, because perfection is impossible, but conscious growth is always possible. Every day offers another opportunity to reclaim responsibility, another opportunity to strengthen discipline, another opportunity to align behavior with values, another opportunity to become more focused, more truthful, more resilient, more purposeful. That is the beauty of human potential. No matter how reactive your past has been, you still possess the ability to choose differently now. And that choice matters more than you realize. One disciplined morning can begin changing a life. One courageous conversation can heal years of silence. One decision to stop making excuses can alter an entire future. One commitment to purpose can awaken strength you never knew existed. Human beings are far more powerful than they believe, but that power remains dormant inside reactive living. It awakens only when a person decides to stop surrendering their mind to chaos and start governing themselves through principles. That is what it means to be proactive. It means becoming the author instead of the victim, the builder instead of the complainer, the thermostat instead of the thermometer, the creator of your habits instead of the prisoner of them. And when enough people begin living that way, families change, communities change, organizations change, nations change, because every great transformation in history began internally before it became external. Always. And now the responsibility becomes yours. Not next year, not when circumstances improve, not when fear disappears. Now, because life is moving whether you act intentionally or not. Time is passing whether you build purposefully or drift unconsciously. The future is being shaped whether you take responsibility or surrender it. So decide. Decide that your attention is too valuable to waste. Decide that your purpose is too important to postpone. Decide that your character matters more than temporary comfort. Decide that your habits will align with your highest values. Decide that your future will no longer be controlled by distraction, excuses, or fear. And then begin. Quietly, deliberately, relentlessly. Become disciplined enough to do what must be done even when emotions resist it. Become focused enough to protect what truly matters. Become courageous enough to act before certainty arrives. Become wise enough to value principles over popularity. Become proactive before life controls you. Because the quality of your future will always be determined by the quality of the choices you make while nobody is watching. And the next choice is yours.